What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing well. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to click on another video here. And it's been a few weeks since I covered another Brazilian film here on the channel. If you guys have been following along over the course of the last couple months, you know that I covered the newly Oscar-nominated film I'm Still Here, and it became my biggest viewed video here on the channel. I got a lot of new subscribers and a lot of people from Brazil commenting, suggesting all sorts of Brazilian films for me to dive into. And since then, I've covered Central Station as well as City of God, and one that I kept seeing in the mix was A Dog's Will. Now, one thing I praised those other films for was its realism. The performances were so real that they felt very grounded, and they had a very realistic and very grounded story, something that was very heavy when it comes down to the subject matter. So a lot of people left comments saying I should check out A Dog's Will as the next film, as it's something that's a little bit more silly, a little bit more slapstick, more of a comedy. So I was excited to check it out. So without further ado, let's get into my thoughts on A Dog's Will. Directed by Guel, Araaes, this film stars people like Matheus, Nachtergaele, Selton, Mello, Denise, Fraga, Fernanda, Montenegro, and many more. And before we get too far into this video, if you guys are a fan of retrospective reviews like this, up-to-date reviews, early reviews, live streams, and the occasional vlog, then you're in the right place, and I'd like to ask you to consider subscribing. But if you're a returning viewer, well, thanks so much for coming back. And like I said in my other videos where I've covered some Brazilian films, I'm having a good time doing this, whether I enjoy the film or not. And so I'm looking forward to hearing more recommendations down below. If there's more films that I need to check out coming from Brazil, definitely let me know. And A Dog's Will is one I had seen tons of comments about. The actual title in Portuguese is O Alto de Compadecida. I believe that's how you pronounce it. From what I can see online, it roughly translates to The Compassionate Woman's Play, which we'll get into in just a little bit as far as where that comes in. But the film, in terms of an English title, is called A Dog's Will, which I think is a weird title for the film, as I feel like that only really plays to a certain portion of this movie. But yeah, going into this film, I was excited to check out a comedy. It was going to be a lot different than the other Brazilian films that I had dipped my toes into, and I didn't really know what fully to expect. So before we get into my thoughts on the movie, let's get into what this movie is all about. A Dog's Will focuses on two simple-minded friends known as João Grilo and Chico, played by Matheus, Nachtergaele, and Selton, Mello. I was really excited to see the two of them here because based on the other films I've seen them in, they played far more serious roles. Selton Mello being the one that I recently saw in I'm Still Here for the very first time, and I thought that he played a really great role there. It's a very serious movie. It's the one, of course, that's being talked about for the Oscars this year. And then when it comes down to Matheus Nachtergaele, I actually just recently saw him in Central Station as well as City of God. Two entirely different films where he's playing a more serious role, especially in City of God. So to see the two of them here in this slapstick comedy that in a lot of ways reminded me of the telenovelas I used to watch with my grandma when I was growing up, as well as something like Dumb and Dumber, I thought it was really interesting to see these true dramatic actors in much sillier roles when they were substantially younger. On top of that, you also have people like Fernanda Montenegro in this film as well, who I recently saw in things like I'm Still Here as well as in Central Station. She's without a doubt, I believe, one of the most popular actresses coming out of Brazil, and I know a lot of people really love her, so I'm sure the inclusion of her in this film was big at the time. This actually came out, I believe, the year after Central Station. And yeah, this is an interesting one because the one I watched was the miniseries that was released in 1999 on television, which is a longer film. This one comes out to about 40 minutes longer than the theatrical version that would be released in 2000. So it was interesting. I was a little confused as to which one to watch initially, but after doing a little bit of research online, I figured why not watch the extended version of the film. That's usually the version I'm always going to be more interested to see. And so yeah, you know, going into this film, I really didn't know what it was about. And the base premise is you have these two friends who are two bumbling idiots that are going around messing with people to get some money in their pockets. They're willing to lie their way in and out of certain situations, and in a lot of ways it reminded me of Dumb and Dumber. You have these two characters that know how each other work. There's a lot of slapstick humor between the two of them, and they're able to kind of get themselves in and out of these situations in really ridiculous ways. They're able to kind of get themselves into the good graces of somebody and then into the bad graces of somebody within the same scene, and then back again in the good graces. The movie does not take itself seriously, and I think it was a bit of a culture shock for me in terms of seeing the really dramatic, serious Brazilian films that I'd recently seen to something that was just so cartoony in a lot of ways. I mentioned a moment ago that this reminded me a lot of the telenovelas I used to watch with my grandma, because when I was growing up as a kid, I spent a lot of time around my grandparents. My grandmothers in particular would spend so much time watching things like Telemundo, Univision, which of course are Spanish central channels, but I was able to, watch those with them at times and watch these very dramatic telenovelas a lot of times that were just so over the top. But there was also the comedic ones, and a lot of times those comedic ones were just as over the top, but in a very slapsticky, silly way, where the performances were really heightened and everything about it felt very cartoony. And that's very much how this film felt to me. I felt A Dog's Will kind of took me back to watching those films with my grandma. Now, what I should mention here, though, is that the film was not available regularly here in the States anywhere. It wasn't on any streaming service. It wasn't available to rent or purchase on some streaming service where I could get an official version with the officially put in subtitles. Instead, I had to watch the full HD version that was available via an upload on YouTube, and I had to rely on the subtitles that are translated and generated by YouTube itself. So I do think there were times where the generation of these translations and the subtitles wasn't as good as it could have been. There were a couple of moments where it didn't really make sense what they were saying, but I was able to kind of piece it together, and I do think that kind of diminished my experience of the film ever so slightly. If somebody knows of a really easy way to be able to watch this film somewhere else, I'd love to hear about it. Maybe I'd give this film a rewatch at some point, but as of right now, I had to watch it that way. So I do think that the translation and the subtitle generation via YouTube wasn't always perfect, but for the most part, I was able to follow the film and see what's going on here. And in a lot of ways, this is an interesting film because it's not really one that has a straightforward narrative. It's not really a movie that has a standard beginning, middle, and end. Like I said, it was a 4-part miniseries that was then condensed into a movie. Now, I didn't watch that theatrical version. I just watched the miniseries version, all edited together. And I think that the film has a charm to it. There's something to it that I think is silly, and I can see why people really enjoy this film. I can see why it's a really beloved film from Brazil, especially if you grew up watching it in the late 90s and the early 2000s. It's really cheesy. It knows what it is. The performances are really over the top, and a lot of the characters are really goofy. It really did feel like a live action cartoon in a lot of ways, which was a nice step away from the very serious Brazilian films I'd seen before. With that said, though, I'd be lying if I said I love this film. I think compared to the other films I've seen, this isn't really a film that's going for heightened filmmaking. And so I kind of just forgave it of that pretty early on. Like, I knew that this was not going to be a film that I'm going into for cinematography or costume design, set design, locations being used, or, riveting storytelling and great performances. This was something that was going to be far more about feel and tone and silliness than it was something that was going to be about a riveting narrative that I was going to find myself connected to by the time the movie was over. What I can say about the film, though, in terms of my biggest positives, is I think our two main characters, Joan and Chico, I think are a lot of fun. Again, they reminded me a lot of the main characters from Dumb and Dumber. I think there's some great funny moments between the two of them, and it was really great to see specifically Matheus Nachtergaele give this very zany performance. He's kind of the main one of the two. I would say he's the one that kind of drives the movie forward for majority of the time. He has majority of the dialogue, and he plays a very silly character, and it was nice to see him give such a different performance from the stuff I'd seen him do before. Selton Mello is funny in the film, but he's more of the simple-minded kind of goofy one who's just kind of a bumbling idiot through a lot of these sequences. There is a fun kind of romantic element around his character in the later part of the film, but for the most part, he feels kind of just like a fun sidekick to the character of Joan. And for the most part, I really thought that their dynamic was what made this film work. Outside of them, one character I found to be pretty funny throughout the course of the film as well is the character of Dora, played by Denise Fraga. She plays this wife to a guy who is a baker and that these two bumbling idiots work for, and she's cheating on her husband at every turn. And there's a lot of funny sequences when she gets the opportunity to possibly cheat with multiple men at once, where you have a kind of a revolving door, including Chico in the mix, and her reactions to a lot of these sequences. Her comedic timing was some of the funniest stuff in the film. I thought her performance, her over-the-top acting, and her facial acting, I thought a lot of times really added to these sequences as well. And those three in general would probably be my favorite in terms of the performances across the board. But with that said, I won't say I loved this film. I found that this is a film that was a little bit messy for me on a story level, and I can't necessarily say that I necessarily found it to be too funny, honestly. That's just my personal take. And maybe it's just that I'm kind of disconnected from the culture. Maybe there's a part of it as well that it's just an older film and is a little bit dated by today's standards as well. So you add in that culture difference and the fact that it's dated, and it maybe is just not something that I was able to be in tuned with as much on a comedic level. And that was something I was curious about, right? Because I actually got a lot of comments from people saying, check this movie out. It's a Brazilian classic. So I was excited to check it out on that level. But I actually had quite a few comments from people saying, hey man, I'm Brazilian. I think A Dog's Will is a great movie, but I don't know if you'll love it because as an American and with it being an older film, I don't know if you'll culturally be able to connect with it as much. And I was like, okay, that's an interesting caution from some people, but I went into it thinking, let me see what I feel about the film in and of itself. And I do kind of feel that there was a little bit of that disconnect. I won't lie. I was watching the film and I never really found myself laughing too much. There was moments I smirked. There was moments I chuckled. There was moments I found myself more engaged, but it wasn't ever really something that I found myself overly compelled by, nor was it ever something that I ever found to be all that funny or all that entertaining. I won't lie. I really didn't love or even really like the film too much. It's more of a film that I appreciated as I was watching it. I wasn't necessarily bored by watching it, but it wasn't necessarily something that gripped me, and that's just my honest take. And I hope I don't turn people off because I am really excited to check out more Brazilian films. I just have to give my honest take there. Now, where the film did get interesting though is when the character of Joan, as well as a few other characters in the film, all end up getting killed and end up going to judgment, where they end up being judged by Jesus Christ himself and the devil. And this was easily the most interesting and the most engaging portion of the film. I almost wish that more of the film had taken place in this location, because this is where the film was able to kind of have fun with over-the-top makeup and costuming, specifically around the character of the devil, who's played by Mello. I thought that he was a really fun part of the film. He very much hammed up his performance. I was completely gripped to the screen when he was on screen. There's also some great practical effect makeup that they do to him to make him the devil in certain sequences, or make him look like the devil. But the film also leans into some very silly behind the scenes VFX as well. There's some moments where like the doors to hell open and you just kind of see like very cartoony looking visuals, and the film was very much leaning into a very silly aesthetic for heaven and hell, and that part I really liked as well. We also get to see Jesus Christ in this whole judgment sequence, who's played by Mauricio Gonçalves, and I thought that he was a fun addition to the film as well. I thought that that element in general, Jesus and the devil, was great. And then I think the thing that probably got a lot of people excited about this film at the time, now having seen a few films and knowing how big of an actress she was at the time, was Fernanda Montenegro, who pops in as the Virgin Mary, and she's really where the title of the film in Portuguese really comes into play. They call her La Compadecida, I believe that's how you pronounce it, I'm sorry, the compassionate, from what I understand. And yeah, she's the one who kind of like comes into this whole judgment situation and kind of looks to the humanity of these characters. And I think that's where the film kind of touched my heart a little bit, is that there's, despite the silliness, despite the ridiculousness of the film has things to say about the humanity of people and how what's come before and what's happened in their lives before and the struggles they've faced make them who they are, good or bad, and that everybody deserves a second chance. And so that was something I enjoyed, and I think Fernanda Montenegro gives easily the best and most dramatic performance in the film. It elevated that whole final sequence there at the end with the judgment portion and Jesus and the devil. It was fun, it was hokey, it was silly, but it was also kind of serious in its own way and had some things to say about life and death. And I think Fernanda Montenegro, if I'm honest, is maybe too good for this movie in a lot of ways in terms of her performance, but I enjoyed the costume design in that area. I enjoyed the filmmaking there. That was where I found myself most engrossed in what was going on a filmmaking side of things. The costume, the makeup, the performances, that was easily my favorite part of the movie. But everything around it, everything before it and everything after it, I felt it just took a little too long. I think the movie's a little bit too long for what it is. Of course, I did watch the longer version, but for what it is, I wanted to see what the longer version was like. I do think it's a little overstuffed at times. I do think there's a lot of characters in the mix I didn't necessarily care for, if I'm honest, but there was some fun to be had. Overall, A Dog's Will is not a film I can necessarily see myself revisiting again, but it's a film I'm glad I've seen. It's a film that I think has its merits. I think there's some fun, silly elements to this film for sure. It's just not something that really connected with me on a humor level, nor is it really something something that connected with me on a story level, but I've seen it and I appreciate all of you guys for suggesting I check it out. And with all that said, I know there's a sequel to this film that actually just came out in the last couple of years called A Rogue's Trial. So I gotta ask you guys, is that film worth checking out? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below. Let me know if I should check out that movie as well, and leave some more comments of some more Brazilian films I should check out. There's so many. I've built a list. I've built a watch list. So if you guys have been enjoying my reviews of Brazilian cinema so far, I do plan over the course of time to start covering more this year. I've had a lot of fun doing it so far, and even though I didn't love A Dog's Will, it is a film that I'm glad I've seen now to kind of check off the list of Brazilian films I've never seen. So a big thanks to all of you guys for recommending it. Thanks to anybody who took the time to watch. And if I disappointed you and you don't like my take on this movie, I totally respect it. I know what it feels like to watch somebody watch a movie that you recommended and they don't really like it. It happens from time to time, but I do look forward to you guys recommending more films to check out. And if I'm missing something here, if there's a part of A Dog's Will that I'm missing that you think I just didn't connect to, please leave your passionate comments down below. Let me know what I missed as far as, you know, what was good about this film to you that I didn't see. Whatever the case may be, I look forward to hearing all of your guys' thoughts. Hit that like button, comment your thoughts down below, subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.